Let us begin with literary theories and approaches to criticism. This is a very important topic in literature in English. It appears in your exams every single year. By the end of this lesson, you will understand the meaning of literary criticism, the major literary theories, how to apply different approaches to analyze texts, and how to answer exam questions. Take your notes. Let us go. First, what is literary criticism? Literary criticism is the study, analysis, evaluation, and interpretation of literature. Critics read literary works and write about them. They offer interpretations. They judge the quality of the work. They explain what the work means. Literary criticism is not just opinion. It is informed by theories and methods. There are many different ways to approach a literary work. Each approach is called a literary theory. A theory is a set of principles or assumptions that guide the analysis. Now let me explain the major literary theories. The first approach is the moral or philosophical approach. This approach judges literature by its moral and philosophical content. Critics ask, does the work teach a moral lesson? Does it promote good values? Does it explore important philosophical questions? This approach is very old. Plato and Aristotle used it. In modern times, critics like Matthew Arnold and F. R. Leavis used it. This approach values literature that is serious, thoughtful, and morally edifying. It tends to reject works that are immoral or trivial. For example, a moral critic would praise a novel that shows the consequences of greed. They would criticize a novel that glorifies violence. Now let me explain the historical approach. The historical approach studies literature in its historical context. Critics ask, what was happening when this work was written? How does the work reflect its time? What historical forces shaped it? This approach assumes that literature is a product of its age. You cannot fully understand a work without understanding the history behind it. For example, to understand Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart, you need to understand the history of colonialism in Nigeria. To understand George Orwell's Animal Farm, you need to understand the Russian Revolution. The historical approach is very useful. It prevents anachronism, which is judging the past by present standards. Now let me explain the biographical approach. The biographical approach studies literature in relation to the author's life. Critics ask, what events in the author's life influenced the work? How does the work reflect the author's experiences, beliefs, or personality? This approach assumes that literature is an expression of the author. For example, to understand Sylvia Plath's poetry, you need to know about her depression and her troubled marriage. To understand Charles Dickens's novels, you need to know about his childhood poverty. The biographical approach can be illuminating, but it also has limits. The author is not the only influence. The work can mean things the author did not intend. Now let me explain the formalist approach. The formalist approach focuses on the form of the literary work. Critics ask, how does the work use language, structure, imagery, and other literary devices? Formalists ignore the author's life, historical context, and moral content. They focus only on the text itself. The text is all that matters. Formalists believe that the literary work is an object in itself. It can be analyzed without outside information. This approach is also called new criticism. It was dominant in the mid-23rd century. Formalists pay close attention to paradox, irony, ambiguity, and tension. They look at how the parts of the work fit together into a unified whole. Now let me explain the sociological approach. The sociological approach studies literature in relation to society. Critics ask, how does the work reflect social structures? What does it say about class, race, gender, or power? This approach includes Marxist criticism and feminist criticism. Marxist criticism focuses on class conflict, economic exploitation, and ideology. Critics ask, how does the work represent the struggles between the rich and the poor? Does it challenge or reinforce capitalist values? For example, a Marxist reading of Wole Soyinka's The Lion and the Jewel might focus on the power dynamics between Baroka and the villagers. It might ask, who benefits from the traditional system? Now let me explain the feminist approach. Feminist criticism focuses on gender. Critics ask, how are women represented? Are they portrayed as strong, independent, and intelligent? Or are they portrayed as weak, dependent, and foolish? Does the work challenge or reinforce patriarchal values? Feminist critics also recover works by women writers who have been neglected. For example, a feminist reading of Purple Hibiscus might focus on Beatrice. At first, she is silent and submissive. At the end, she poisons her husband. The novel shows that women can be victims, but they can also be agents of change. Now let me explain the psychological approach. The psychological approach uses the theories of psychology to analyze literature. Critics often use Sigmund Freud's ideas. They look for unconscious desires, repressed memories, and defense mechanisms. They ask, what are the characters' hidden motivations? What do their dreams or slips of the tongue reveal? For example, a psychological reading of Death and the King's Horseman might focus on Ellison's delay. Why does he not kill himself immediately? Perhaps he has an unconscious fear of death. Perhaps he loves life too much. His son, Olunde, has no such fear. He is able to do his duty. The psychological approach can reveal hidden dimensions of characters. Now let me explain the archetypal approach. The archetypal approach studies the recurring patterns, symbols, and characters that appear in literature across cultures. Critics use the theories of Carl Jung. Jung believed that there is a collective unconscious shared by all humans. This collective unconscious contains archetypes. Archetypes are universal symbols and characters. Examples include the hero, the mother, the wise old man, the shadow, and the journey. The archetypal approach looks for these patterns. For example, a hero's journey has stages: the call, the departure, the trials, the return. Many stories follow this pattern. In Death and the King's Horseman, Olunde is a hero. He answers the call. He takes his father's place. He returns to the ancestors. The archetypal approach connects individual works to universal human experiences. Now let me explain how to apply these approaches. You do not need to use all approaches at once. Choose one or two that fit the work and the question. For example, if you were asked about the historical context of Things Fall Apart, use the historical approach. If you are asked about the character of Olana in Half of a Yellow Sun, you might use the feminist approach or the psychological approach. If you are asked about the language of a poem, use the formalist approach. The best critics are flexible. They choose the approach that best illuminates the work. Now let me give you a sample analysis using multiple approaches. Let us analyze Wole Soyinka's Death and the King's Horseman. Using the historical approach, you would discuss the colonial context. The play is based on an actual event that occurred in 1946. The British district officer prevented the ritual suicide. 2 men died. Soyinka uses this event to critique colonialism. The British did not understand Yoruba culture. They thought they were saving a life. They caused 2 deaths. Using the archetypal approach, you would discuss Olunde as a hero. He answers the call. He sacrifices himself for his community. He fulfills his duty where his father fails. He is the archetypal hero. Using the psychological approach, you would discuss Ellison's delay. He loves life. He cannot let go. His unconscious desire to live prevents him from doing his duty. His son has no such conflict. He is able to act. Using the feminist approach, you would discuss Iyaloja. She is the mother of the market. She is wise and powerful. She speaks the final words of the play. She curses the British. She mourns the loss of 2 men. Women have power in this society, but it is limited to the market. The feminist approach would also ask why there are no major female characters. Using the moral approach, you would ask what the play teaches. It teaches the importance of cultural understanding. It teaches that duty is important. It teaches that colonialism caused great harm. Using the formalist approach, you would focus on the language. Soyinka uses rich, poetic dialogue. He uses symbolism and irony. The play is a tragedy. The form reinforces the content. Now let me explain how to answer exam questions on literary theories. A common exam question asks you to define literary criticism and list major approaches. Here is a sample answer. Literary criticism is the study, analysis, evaluation, and interpretation of literature. Major approaches include the moral approach, which judges literature by its moral content; the historical approach, which studies literature in its historical context; the biographical approach, which relates literature to the author's life; the formalist approach, which focuses on form and literary devices; the sociological approach, which studies literature in relation to society, including Marxist and feminist criticism. The psychological approach, which uses psychology to analyze characters and themes. The archetypal approach, which looks for universal patterns and symbols. Another exam question asks you to apply a specific approach to a text. Here is your answer. To apply the feminist approach to Purple Hibiscus, first identify the major female characters. They are Beatrice, Kainene, and Auntie Ifeoma. Beatrice is initially silent and submissive. She takes her husband's abuse. She does not protect her children. At the end, she poisons her husband. She takes action. She frees herself and her children. Auntie Ifeoma is independent. She is a university lecturer. She supports her family. She does not need a husband. She raises her children to be free. The novel shows different possibilities for women. Women can be victims, but they can also be survivors and agents of change. The novel challenges patriarchal values. It shows that women are not weak. Another exam question asks you to compare two approaches. Here is your answer. The historical approach and the formalist approach are very different. The historical approach looks outside the text. It asks about the time period, the author's life, and the social context. The formalist approach looks inside the text. It focuses on language, structure, imagery, and irony. The historical approach explains why a work was written. The formalist approach explains how it works. Both approaches are valuable. The best criticism often combines them. For example, to fully understand Death and the King's Horseman, you need historical knowledge about colonialism. You also need formalist analysis of Soyinka's use of irony and symbolism. Here is what you need to take away. Literary criticism is the analysis and evaluation of literature. Major approaches include moral, historical, biographical, formalist, sociological, Marxist, feminist, psychological, and archetypal. Each approach has different assumptions and methods. The moral approach judges by content. The historical approach studies context. The biographical approach focuses on the author. The formalist approach focuses on form. The sociological approach focuses on society. The psychological approach focuses on the mind. The archetypal approach focuses on universal patterns. Good critics choose the approach that best fits the work and the question. Understanding literary theories is essential for advanced literary analysis. Practice these concepts. When you have them down, move to topic 6.